Our last speaker of the session is Professor Wolfgang Kasper. Wolfgang is one of Australia's most treasured economists and is currently an Emeritus Professor of Economics at the University of New South Wales. He was awarded his PhD from Keele University, and his distinguished career, which would take the whole afternoon to describe even in small detail, has included posts at Australian National University, Australian Defence Force Academy, the Reserve Bank of Australia and the Centre for Independent Studies. He has published some 20 monographs and more than 300 articles. Many credit his scholarship and advocacy of market deregulation as a principal driver of the economic reforms of the Hawke-Keating and Howard Costello era. Last night we rightly awarded him with a Lifetime Achievement Award, and it gives me great pleasure to invite him to the stage to talk to us today.
Thank you very much for the introduction and inviting me to this good-looking conference. I'm an economist. I worked in about a dozen countries around the world as a consultant, as a lecturer, etc. And now I stand before you as a man in the prime of his senility. And as behooves my age and my international orientation, I want to place what I have to say in an international long-term context. When we are talking about prosperity and economic well-being, we should focus, in my opinion, on the long-term, regular, sustained performance as to productivity and per capita income in real terms, that is, eliminating inflation. And we should ask which countries, which societies have managed a consistently high level of income and equity for people who are prepared to work. Now, to get a bit of a feel for that, I engaged in a light-hearted statistical exercise, looking back to the year 1850 to now, every 25 years, asking who were the gold medal winners, etc., in reaching relatively high per capita incomes, and who maintained that level. Now, that long-term marathon amongst the wealth producers has given me results that I would describe as gold, silver, and bronze medals in the economic growth Olympics. The winner in it is Switzerland. Most consistently, most wealthy, most productive, and having lived there and partly being educated there, most civilized. Second silver medalist is the United States, and the bronze medal goes to Australia. That may surprise you. And then there are place getters, just to mention them, the Netherlands, Canada, and in an earlier age, but rapidly falling out of medal contention, the United Kingdom. Now, with regard to the Australian result, which surprised me and friends with whom I talked about it, it is not so surprising after all. Just the most recent quarter century is quite remarkable in that as of April 2017, we are the world record holder in economic expansion without a technical recession, uninterrupted. Just now we surpassed the Netherlands. Have we celebrated this fact? No, we are grumpy, we're insecure, we feel miserable. Indeed, the ultimo negativists next door in the ABC tried to demolish the statistical evidence because it's evidently politically incorrect to feel good. Have the politicians celebrated that achievement? And it is an achievement. Oh no, of course, they are too busy with controversies of the day-to-day kind, counterproductive point scoring. And what I just said about Australia not having had a recession is quite important to the long-term growth record, because differences in long-term economic growth are mostly made on the way down. If you avoid shrinking long, deep recessions, you are out of you're in middle contentions. And if you have distribution fights that make for extended recessions, you are out of middle contention. Now, back to that middle table. Can we learn something from this evidence? Indeed, I think we can. First, if you look at the big international comparison, all the countries in my list rate economic freedom relatively highly, whether it's measured more recently by Cato or the Heritage Foundation, or before on a loser measurement. Depending on good rules that prevent these distribution fights is absolutely essential. Preventing corruption prevents these shrinkages that then throw you back in the foot race. Second common thing is that all these countries have a tradition of self-reliant individualism. Again, that may surprise you when you look critically at Australia only, but you look at other countries further afield, and you will see that there is still, from the 19th century, a rugged individualism in this country. And reflecting this, all the countries on my list are self-reliant, are stable democracies. All except the United Kingdom have a strong tradition of federal or quasi-federal rivalry between states or provinces, coming more or less close to the description of competitive federalism. And I think that's a very important source, not only because I'm Swiss influenced on that one. All these countries have been open to international trade, have attracted capital, enterprises and ideas from elsewhere in the world, often with low taxes, competitive taxes, and often have at the same time exported these production factors to other countries. Openness is absolutely essential to long-term prosperity. But there are, of course, important differences between these various countries. The likes of Switzerland and Holland have relied on skills and innovative and commercial prowess. And I speak here of skills, not of education. There's a difference. I want more TAFE, less of these fake universities that don't even know what Western civilization is about. The non-European countries in my list have relied more on tapping natural resources, on attracting immigrants and integrating them, absorbing them into the shared culture that forms the intellectual and institutional capital of a country. But tapping natural resources, land, minerals, water, sunshine, etc., also requires high skills. Observers who tell us Australia just digs up dirt and ships it are wrong. They don't know the first thing about mining. And Australia's long-term strength in agricultural production, again, is testimony to the cultivation of long-term skills and enterprise to overcome a secular downward trend in the terms of trade. That is, falling prices and stable or rising input costs. So I would say the bronze medal for Australia is properly earned. Let me pause a bit here and emphasize that what I'm talking about is sustained levels of high income, not the growth rate, which is the normal thing in policy discussion. If amongst the countries that I have selected, the growth rate were the criterion, Taiwan would come out tops. It has now surpassed Japan in per capita incomes. And if we have a shorter time horizon, it would be, and a regional perspective, it would be Shenzhen in southern China, a free enterprise zone. From 1980 to 2016, real GDP grew by 22% per annum. Go there if you want economic education. And I only mentioned Taiwan and Shenzhen and places like that because the middle table may well soon change. If we rest on our laurels, for example, if we adopt the Green Party 4-day work week, we'll drop out for good. Of course, every newspaper article writes about the China demand flattening off for raw materials. That's true, and that will probably be a future trend, and India won't fill that gap. So we have, I would suggest, an obligation to look more at a Swiss-type benchmark, more know-how intensive, more service-oriented development. Service industries are dominating and will dominate the future. And service production depends on good rules, on what we call institutions. And that means in practice more economic freedom, smaller government, more self-responsibility, less visible hand redistribution through regulatory and fiscal means. Ideas for the service industry, more than probably manufacturing, do matter. I agree with what Malcolm Roberts said. Prosperity starts in the people's mind, between the ears. I think we would be well advised to really switch the public discussion about a long-term growth strategy and get away from this bickering tactics about third-order political issues. We do have in this country long-term shared interests, but tell that to these guys in question hour in Parliament. And we should reject ministers who say, oh, I'm here from the government, I'm here to help you. If I despair when I see someone go to South Australia, talks to people who have a tradition of making corrugated iron and say, from now on you will produce high tensile steel, anti-magnetic steel for French submarines. It ain't like that. You have to start a totally new industry to do that. I also despair when I see handouts being given to states that try single-handedly to save the planet and undermine our most important single competitive advantage, which is cheap energy. Let's demand, in other words, that politicians act a little bit more like grown-ups and maybe go to school in Switzerland or Holland with a different mindset about politics. But we have to be, let's not be naive, political elites rarely help. Their speciality is spin and wasting resources. The easy way out is always to borrow. Let's postpone problems. We can spend more. But if you think you can ever win a gold medal by borrowing, just look at Greece or Japan. In Australia, we were in a very comfortable position with public debt, and then the Rudd, Swan, Gillard merry-go-round, without any necessity, in my opinion, pushed us from surplus and a comfortable position down the slippery slope to rapidly increasing debt. And the Turnbull-Morrison team either seem unwilling or unable to do anything about that. And we are confronted sooner or later with an aging problem, which will put new burdens on budgets. There is a potential calamity awaiting at least those who are aged less than 60 years in this room. I think the senility brigade, like myself, will be okay. Welfare is the big elephant in the room. If we don't do something dramatic and rethink public health care, risk coverage for unemployment, age, pension, superannuation finance, we will be in deep trouble in 20 years' time. Collectively financing that by either tax or more debt is not the way out. I have lately been quite interested again in proposals coming out of New Zealand. Some of you may have seen them by Sir Roger Douglas and Robert McCulloch, who say, let's re-examine what's happening successfully in Chile and Singapore, where we do compulsory saving for old age, for insurance against health risks, etc. Now, I know the word compulsory doesn't go down very well amongst libertarians, but the alternative is that we postpone the taxing compulsion into the future. And the anarchic solution, say, oh, well, the people who haven't provided for themselves, let them die, is probably in Australia not acceptable. Be aware of the political bureaucratic elites who do not favor fiscal discipline. They do not favor economic freedom. They are for more interventionism. And be aware, of course, of the media lackeys who repeat these messages. I recently wrote an article in Policy, which I think is in that bag, where I said that the unrelenting growth of the burden of government that replaces more and more private choices, private sovereignty, by public choices is the key to the ballot box rebellions that have started in all Western democracies. We have to be aware of populism, I believe, but I'm also not terribly terrified by the fact that they stir up things a bit. I agree with what was said earlier. A bit of Trumpism is probably very good for this, but this eternal business as usual, I do deals, etc. The other enemies of freedom that we have to watch are the international power brokers that favor collectivism. I think not only of the UN and the OECD, not only of these international high-tax cartels that go by groups of 5, 7, 20 or whatever. They promote controls over people once removed from the democratic process. Now, the extreme case is, of course, the EU, which is there to strangle national sovereignty, and we know what's happening in the electoral scene there. I believe the only basis for a free democracy to function properly is the nation state. If I'm wrong on that one, tell me in the Q&A session afterwards. A UN-governed world is no way to go if we want a decent life under freedom. Nations have a shared institutional capital, and capital is valuable. Institutional capital is productive. The rules that we have developed over time, the habits and attitudes that we share, are absolutely essential to long-term growth. They are the rules on which trust and peace are based. Now, identity politics has been mentioned a lot here, is the enemy of some of the things I said. If you are first and foremost part of an aggrieved tribe, and the politicians will help you, you are on the wrong way and away from prosperity and peace. Let's be very clear about these shared institutions that I just mentioned. These have also implications for people movements, and here I get into difficulty because immigration at this conference is discussed under different angles and assumptions. My own opinion is this. Australia and all the other countries have benefited from immigration. They are an important source of our prosperity, and that source should be kept alive. But immigrants have to integrate. If we get lots of groups in that refuse to integrate for whatever reasons, that have a separate identity, that send signals out that we are being colonized by them, if politicians cater to that identity policy card, Section 18C, etc., we will end up with a fractious multiculturalism, which is very costly. Chris Berg, who said he wants unlimited open immigration, ought to be taught by Sinclair Davidson a little bit about the transaction costs of a fractious society. Fractious societies fail. Less liberty, less prosperity, less peace. If we grant open access to people from failed states who carry with them attitudes that made their home countries fractious and unsafe, they will carry this into the Australian scene, and we have to stand up now. by selective immigration and defense, rigorous defense of a secular, tolerant, egalitarian society. Now, the rise of populism, as I said, is probably a pretty good tonic to shake things up a bit, but we have to make sure that the populists stay committed to those basic values that have been the underpinning of the medal-winning strategies in the countries that I enumerated. That means individual freedom, equality before the law. If populist possum stirrers like Trump deviate from these principles, we should turn against them, but we should not panic blindly. For a bit of an orientation for the younger people, I'd certainly say, if you want to know how to think about politics, Milton Friedman, the patron saint of this meeting, would be a good first guide. Also, look at the writings of people like John Locke, Adam Smith, Frederick Bastiat, Mises, Hay, I could go on. I think it's our citizen responsibility to learn what promotes liberty, prosperity, and peace. It is our democratic responsibility to vote for people who share these basic aspirations, who understand this. By the way, I would also say, don't waste too much time on studying Karl Marx, Gramsci, or Piketty. Whatever the reviews say, they're not all that interesting. Don't follow the collectivist green prophets from Al Gore, the United Nations Environment Programme, the Earth Systems Governance Project, Tim Flannery's self-anointed Climate Council, the Australian Student Environmental Network. They are the enemies of freedom and future prosperity. Nor are they good for the environment. Poor and stagnant economies have neither the resources nor do they allow the will to do something for a livable environment. Growing countries, rich countries, Switzerland, etc., have pretty good environments, and it costs to maintain a good environment. If you want freedom, prosperity, and peace, treat those guys as pure poison. Now, this is very unlibertarian a note to end on, if I say do not read Marx. But remember one thing, you can try any mushroom in the forest, but some only once. Thank you.